The rain had been coming down since before I woke up, tapping against my window like it had something to say. My alarm was screaming and I swatted at it blindly until it shut up. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I stared at the floor, wishing I could crawl back under the covers. Instead, I got up, shuffled to the bathroom, and splashed cold water on my face. Downstairs, the house was just as quiet as usual. Mom was at the kitchen counter scrolling through her phone, her face blank, like she wasn't really reading anything. Dad was at the table buried in his newspaper, his coffee steaming next to him. The tension between us was thick, and I could feel it pressing down on me as I sat there eating my cereal. "Late again?" Dad asked, without even looking up. I didn't bother answering. What was the point? He always had something to say, some little dig to throw at me. I finished my cereal as quickly as I could, grabbed my backpack, and walked out the door. The rain hit me in the face immediately, and I cursed under my breath as I made my way to my car. The windshield wipers squeaked as they worked overtime, barely keeping up with the downpour. I drove the same route I always did, past the same houses, the same stores, and finally, it. The old building sat back from the road, partially hidden by overgrown trees and weeds. Neon Haven, the faded sign still read, though half the letters were missing now. The rain made the graffiti on the boarded-up windows look fresh, almost alive. I'd driven by that place 100 times, maybe more. Every time I felt this weird mix of curiosity and dread, like it was watching me just as much as I was watching it. I'd heard all the warnings growing up. "Stay away from that place," Mom always said, her voice sharper than usual whenever it came up. Dad didn't talk about it much, but my uncle, he had stories. He used to say the place was cursed, that something bad happened there back in the day. Mom worked there as a teenager before the fire shut it down in '92. She used to tell me about how it was the coolest spot in town, with all the latest games and flashing lights. But when I asked her about the fire, she'd shut down. "It's just not a place you should go," she'd say. And that was that. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, what was it about that place that made everyone so nervous? When I got home that evening, the rain still hadn't let up. I tossed my backpack onto the couch and went to the kitchen for something to eat. Mom was standing by the sink, staring out the window like she was lost in thought. "Hey," I said, opening the fridge. She didn't respond right away, and when she did, her voice was soft. "You drove past it again, didn't you?" I froze, a cold chill running down my spine. "What are you talking about?" "The arcade," she said, turning to look at me. Her eyes were heavy, almost scared. "You always do." I laughed, but it came out awkward. "It's just a building, Mom. What's the big deal?" She didn't answer, just shook her head and went back to staring out the window. Later that night, Dad and I got into it again. I slammed my door shut when it was over, grabbed a drink from my stash, and texted the group chat, "Chris, we doing anything tonight?" A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Alex. "Let's do something stupid. I'm bored." Sarah. "Define stupid." Chris. "Like breaking into the arcade?" Alex. "Bet." An hour later, we were packed into Alex's car, the rain finally starting to let up as we drove. The air was thick with the smell of wet pavement and stale fast food, and the energy in the car was buzzing. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," Sarah said from the back seat, her voice half laughing, half nervous. "Come on, it'll be fun," Alex said, grinning. "Besides, we're just looking around, no big deal." I wasn't so sure. Something about it felt wrong. But I wasn't about to back out. Not after I was the one who suggested it. When we pulled up, the arcade looked even creepier at night. The street lamp nearby flickered weakly, casting long, jagged shadows across the cracked pavement. "All right, let's do this," Alex said, hopping out of the car. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the building. The faded neon sign seemed to shimmer faintly, like it was trying to come back to life. "You okay?" Sarah asked, nudging me. "Yeah," I said, shaking it off. "Let's go." The door creaked loudly as Alex pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty space inside. The air was damp and smelled like mildew and dust. The arcade was a time capsule frozen in the early 90s. Machines lined the walls, their screens dark and cracked, while old posters hung crookedly on the walls, their colors faded. "Holy crap," Alex whispered. "This place is awesome." "Awesome isn't the word I'd use," Sarah muttered, sticking close to me. As we wandered deeper inside, I felt that same weird mix of curiosity and dread I always did when I passed the place. It was quiet. Too quiet. Even our footsteps sounded wrong, like the building was swallowing the noise. "Hey, check this out," Alex called, pointing to a breaker box in the corner. He flipped a few switches and suddenly, the arcade came to life. Neon lights buzzed and flickered, casting strange, colorful shadows. The machines powered on one by one, their screens glowing dimly. Music began to play, distorted and slow, like it was coming from underwater. "Let's play something," Alex said, heading straight for a Pac-Man machine that was still working. As I watched him drop a quarter into the slot, my stomach twisted into a knot. I couldn't shake the feeling that we just made a huge mistake. I didn't think it was possible for the place to feel creepier, but with the lights buzzing and flickering, it was like stepping into some alternate version of reality. The shadows weren't right. They stretched too far, bending at strange angles, like the light didn't know how to behave anymore. Alex was the first to really embrace the moment, of course. He grabbed the joystick on the Pac-Man machine, a stupid grin on his face. "Yo, this still works," he said, laughing like a kid at Christmas. "I don't know if we should," Sarah started, but Alex was already lost in the game. The rest of us wandered around, trying to laugh off the uneasiness creeping up our spines. I passed rows of machines, some of their screens flickering with static, others glowing faintly, showing distorted images. I swear one screen flashed my reflection, but it wasn't me. The face staring back was hollow-eyed, pale, like something had drained the life out of it. "Hey Chris," Alex called, breaking my trance. "Think you could beat my high score?" I walked back over, pretending I wasn't freaked out. "High score? Dude, you've barely cracked 5,000 points." We all laughed, but it was short-lived. The air in the room felt heavier now, like the weight of something unseen pressing down on us. "All right, last life," Alex said, leaning into the screen. His eyes were glued to the maze as he frantically moved Pac-Man away from the ghosts. The machine beeped loudly as one of the ghosts caught him, and the screen flashed "Game over." Then everything stopped. The lights flickered harder than before, and the machine powered down with a low whine like a dying animal. Alex stumbled back, clutching his chest. "Dude, you okay?" I asked, stepping closer. He didn't answer. He was gasping, his face pale, his eyes wide with panic. He dropped to his knees and Sarah screamed. "Help him!" she shouted. I knelt next to him, my hands shaking as I tried to figure out what was wrong. "Alex, what's going on? Talk to me." He didn't. His body just went limp, collapsing to the floor. We tried CPR, but Alex wasn't responding. It was like something had pulled the life right out of him. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then it moved, stepping out from the corner where the light didn't quite reach. It was tall, too tall, and impossibly thin, its limbs stretching unnaturally. Its face, it didn't have a face, just two glowing red eyes staring right at us. "Chris," Sarah whispered, clutching my arm. "Do you see that?" I couldn't answer. My throat felt like it had closed up. The figure stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate. The air grew colder with each step, and I swear I could hear it breathing, this low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. "Run," I managed to choke out, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure reached down and grabbed Alex's limp body by the ankle. I lunged forward, trying to grab him, but it was like something shoved me back. My hands passed through nothing but air, but the force was real. "Let him go," Sarah screamed, tears streaming down her face. The figure dragged Alex into the shadows, its glowing eyes never leaving us. And then, just like that, they were gone. Panic set in. We ran to the doors, but they wouldn't budge. No matter how hard we pulled or kicked, they wouldn't move an inch. "We're locked in," Sarah cried, her voice trembling. "Check the windows," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But the windows were boarded up tight, and no amount of pushing or prying made a difference. The arcade machines began to hum again, one by one. Their screens flickered to life, but something was wrong. The games weren't showing their normal graphics. Instead, they displayed images of us, distorted, twisted versions of our faces. "What the hell is happening?" Sarah whispered. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the air felt heavier now, like we were being watched from every angle. We decided to stick together, huddling in the middle of the arcade, where we could see everything. But the shadows didn't care about our little plan. They moved on their own, growing and twisting, creeping closer, no matter where we stood. "I think it's messing with us," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "What is?" I asked, even though I already knew. "The figure, the shadows, all of it. It's like it's playing some kind of sick game with us." We started hearing whispers, low and faint, like voices coming from the machines. They called our names, laughing and taunting us. I tried to tune them out, but it was impossible. "Chris," one voice hissed from a nearby pinball machine. "Come play with us." Sarah screamed again, pointing to the far end of the arcade. The shadow figure was back, standing perfectly still, its red eyes glowing brighter than before. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty room. It didn't answer. Instead, the machines all powered up at once, their lights flashing wildly. The figure raised one long clawed hand and pointed to an old pinball machine in the center of the room. Its meaning was clear. "It wants you to play," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "No way," I said, shaking my head. "You have to," she said, her eyes wide and pleading. Maybe if you play, it'll let us go." I looked back at the figure. Its glowing eyes seemed to burn into me, daring me to step forward. With a deep breath, I moved toward the machine. As I got closer, the air grew colder and my heart pounded so hard I thought it might explode. I reached out, my hand trembling, and pulled the plunger to start the game. The old pinball machine hummed to life as I pulled the plunger. The lights on its surface were dim, flickering in colors that seemed wrong. Reds too dark, greens too sickly. The familiar sound of the ball rolling into place was almost comforting, but then I saw the screen. It wasn't just a score counter. It showed Alex. His face, frozen in a silent scream, flickered across the display. "Chris," Sarah whispered behind me. "What's happening?" "I don't know," I said, my voice shaking. "But I think this is the only way to get out." I nudged the flippers, sending the ball up the board. It bounced off bumpers and ramps, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the empty arcade. But as I played, the machine fought back. The ball moved faster than it should, slipping through the flippers like it had a mind of its own. Every time I lost a ball, the screen flashed new images. Alex being dragged deeper into the shadows. Sarah crying and clutching at her chest. Me standing alone in the arcade, surrounded by darkness. The figure's voice spoke, not aloud but directly into my mind. Win and they live, lose and you all stay here, forever. The words weren't spoken so much as imposed, like they were carved into my brain. My hands trembled on the flippers as the stakes became brutally clear. The ball launched again, and this time the machine became even more hostile. The bumpers shot it back at impossible speeds. The ramps twisted, and the flippers lagged just enough to let the ball slip by. I could hear Sarah behind me, begging me to stop, but I couldn't. I was trapped, locked into this game. I glanced back at Sarah for a second, just 1 second, and I regretted it instantly. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. Behind her, the shadow figure loomed, its red eyes glowing brighter than ever. "Chris!" she screamed, as its claws stretched toward her. "Sarah, get away from it!" I shouted, my voice cracking. She tried to run, but the figure didn't move like a person. It shifted, darting through the shadows, cutting her off. I turned back to the game, my heart pounding. I had to win. It was the only way to save her. The machine's lights flickered violently, the distorted music growing louder, almost deafening. The last ball dropped into play, and I knew this was it. My hands were slick with sweat as I gripped the flippers. The ball shot up the ramp, hitting a series of bumpers that lit up in quick succession. The score skyrocketed, numbers climbing faster than I could process. For a moment, I thought I was going to win, but then the ball veered off course, heading straight for the gap between the flippers. I lunged, hitting both buttons with everything I had. The flippers moved too slow. The ball slipped through, and the screen flashed, "Game over." "No," I screamed, slamming my fists against the machine. The shadow figure laughed, a deep guttural sound that made my stomach turn. It reached out and the room plunged into darkness. I couldn't see anything. Not Sarah, not the arcade, not even my own hands. Then the images came, flashing in the void. Alex dragged into a pit of shadows, his screams echoing endlessly. Sarah pulled away from me, her body dissolving into the dark. Me, standing alone, the shadow figure looming over me. I tried to fight it, to push back against the darkness, but it was overwhelming. The figure's voice echoed in my head again. "You've lost. You all belong to me now." Just as I felt myself slipping away, something cut through the darkness, a faint light. It wasn't coming from the machines or the figure. It was coming from my pocket. I reached in and pulled out a quarter. It was old, its edges worn smooth, but it shimmered faintly, glowing with a warmth that felt completely out of place in this nightmare. The figure paused, its glowing eyes narrowing. "You wanted a game?" I said, my voice shaking but defiant. "Let's play one more." I slammed the quarter into the machine and the darkness erupted into light. The pinball machine roared to life, brighter and louder than before. This time, it wasn't just me against the machine. It was me against the figure. The ball shot onto the board, and the game became a blur of flashing lights and frantic sounds. The figure tried to interfere, its claws swiping at the ball, but the glowing quarter seemed to repel it. I don't know how long I played. Seconds, minutes, hours. All I knew was that I couldn't stop. With every point I scored, the shadows receded, pulling back toward the corners of the room. Finally, the machine lit up with a triumphant sound. The screen flashed, "Winner!" The shadow figure let out a scream. its form dissolving into smoke. The darkness lifted and the arcade was quiet once more. I turned around, and there was Sarah, lying on the floor, breathing but unconscious. I ran to her, shaking her gently until her eyes fluttered open. "Chris?" she whispered. "It's over," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. We stumbled to the door, and this time it opened. The cool night air hit us like a wave, and we didn't stop running until we were far, far away from Neon Haven. The next day, I tried to tell someone, anyone, what had happened. But who would believe me? The police searched the arcade, but they found nothing. No Alex, no Shadow. Not even the machines were working anymore. Sarah doesn't talk about it. She avoids me now, and I can't blame her. I wish I could avoid myself. I still drive past the arcade sometimes, even though I know I shouldn't. It's still there, the sign faded and broken. But sometimes, just for a moment, I see it flicker, and I know it's waiting.